I'm good.
All right, it's the Lex and Pete show. Thursday, beginning of week 4. Tua is dead. First, a word from our sponsors, as always, Sundog Multimedia. Sundog Multimedia is an online communication social media company. They were once just a personal tool that has since evolved into something much bigger, allowing users to communicate, research, and discover things that impact their lives and daily decisions. Sundog will collaborate with you to help build a modern yet nimble social media strategy by utilizing innovative and traditional media principles. Sundog is also a proud supporter of the Stop Soldier Suicide Foundation. Follow Sundog on Instagram. That's at Sundog_multimedia. Brains, brawn, and true professionalism. That's easy peasy moving and service. Moving, muscle for hire, assembly, errands, you name it. Easy peasy is a multi-purpose team. Need something? Just ask. All right, so we're coming fresh off of Thursday Night Football. I thought maybe we'd have a little bit more to react to. We were talking about it earlier in the game. It was looking like it was going to be a very good one. Then all of a sudden, Tua, by way of a very dirty WWE style tackle, was ruled out of the game after slamming his head on the ground. He probably came back too early. I don't necessarily know how much is tied into him actually coming back too early, or if it's more of just inconvenient, more of just a really bad coincidence. But either way, not a good look for the Dolphins. He looked really bad coming off of the first injury last week. He still came back into the game, still played pretty well. The Dolphins, he came in, he still played winning football when he came back. He looked fine, out there today, but of course, that hit looked awful. His hands, I don't know what the hell they were doing. It did not look promising. It does sound like he is expected to travel home with the team. So I guess he's fine on that front. I don't know exactly what that means as far as him coming back. But Slippery Pete, this is exactly what you wish for. What are your thoughts?
I mean, I didn't wish for this. It's a rough game. Injuries happen. They're out there. It's football. Rough game. Injuries happen. That said, I hope nothing affects Tua's life and the quality of his life going forward. We hope he's fine, regardless of how I feel about Tua's play on the football field. I hope he is fine. There's something to be said, though, about how he played before the hit.
Is there?
I think so. I mean, there was a pretty ugly interception. He grossly underthrew Tyreek. Had a horrible interception before the injury.
So that's it. It's just that one play. That's all you're going to judge it on.
No, I'm not going to judge it on that. But I just didn't think he looked that good before the.
Well, you know what they say: kick a man while he's down. So, I guess if that's how you get off, like I said, this is what you wish for. I did pull the receipts. You did, you have been wishing for a season-ending injury to one of my players. Sure enough, Mac Jones has no ankle. Tua has no brain. So this is what you wanted. So if you want to gloat like you just were, go ahead.
I'm not. Opportunity. No. I'm not gloating in the face of Tua's injury. I'm gloating in the fact that I'm right about Tua. I'm gloating in the fact that I'm right about Tua. I can.
So you're so based off of him being slammed into the ground, to the point where he had a reaction where his hands looked as if he was becoming crippled. That makes you right about Tua.
No, what made me sure about Tua is his play before the injury. But
all you're doing is bringing up one play. I mean, we could bring up his play before the injury 2 weeks ago, playing against Baltimore when he put up an unbelievable performance. That was play before the injury. But you're going to cherry pick one interception and use that as a point.
I mean, not so much cherry pick one interception. I don't think he played well prior to that, outside the interception. And also, I think you see,
you're talking about a quarter and a half of football, though. Think about what you're doing.
Think about when Teddy Bridgewater comes in.
He looked horrible.
I don't think he looked horrible. He was 11 for 14 with 175 yards and a touchdown.
But that's exactly what you do. You're a box score guy. You check the box score. Somebody like me actually watches the tape.
I watched the entire game.
Just look at what the Dolphins offense looked like without Tua. I think that speaks to at least the level that Tua's on as far as him belonging as a starting quarterback. You could say that Teddy Bridgewater looked good for Teddy Bridgewater standards. Teddy Bridgewater did not look like a starting quarterback. And this is a guy he's considered a high-end backup. He's shown that he can step in and he can, keep a team afloat. But there's a reason that he doesn't keep a job as a starting quarterback. There's a reason that the Saints didn't stand by him and make him into the starting quarterback instead of a guy like Jameis, right? Or how they committed to a guy like Taysom Hill. So Teddy Bridgewater's a backup for a reason. And if you watch the game instead of just looking at his completion percentage, because so many of those were just little check downs, he didn't play well. The Dolphins offense did not play well. The Dolphins offense put up how many points? What did it end up being? 16, 17? Because they missed an extra point. So 16.
Post to injury, you mean?
No. How many points did they just put up in general? Right? They didn't put up like a good amount. They had what? 12 in the second half, 13 in the second half? Or did they get up to 10? What did they get to in the first half?
12 in the first half, 3 in the second half.
Yeah. So it's like, look at what that offense did. Okay. That offense completely just hit a wall. And sure, I understand they got a touchdown with Teddy Bridgewater. I understand they got a touchdown with Teddy Bridgewater as a quarterback. That's because they played 2.5 quarters with him as the quarterback.
But he was still able to throw the Tyreek play, just throwing it deep to Tyreek Hill, underthrown, throw a bomb.
We've seen Tua throw it deep to Tyreek Hill, though.
I know. I just don't.
But you're cherry picking. But you're cherry picking one interception. You're cherry picking one interception, and it was also your attempt to kick a guy while he's down. Because you could have just said nothing at all, but instead you decided to point out one play, and it was one bad play that he had in this game. And you're talking about, but we saw Teddy Bridgewater throw it deep to Tyreek. I can pull up tape of Tua throwing it deep to Tyreek. I can pull up tape of him. What?
Exactly. That's my point. It's the same ball. Like I didn't see much difference between. But
we're also watching Teddy Bridgewater in the same offense that Tua plays in. That Tua has put up, all these touchdowns, has put up these good games. This offense has looked so good. That offense did not look good with Teddy Bridgewater playing. You can look at the stats like you do because you're a box score warrior. You don't watch the game. You read the blogs. You check the box scores, but you don't know what you're watching. It's why you claim to be a Texas fan, but you don't know anything about the Red River Shootout. You think,
all right, let's not get into Texas.
Because you don't know
get this into Texas.
No, because you don't know anything. Okay, you clearly didn't watch the game and actually watch how that offense looked. That offense did not look good with Teddy Bridgewater as the quarterback. If you had any type of brain in between these ears, you would see that offense took a step back without their starting quarterback in.
Any team would take a step back,
and they did. And you're out here trying to argue that we're watching like the same quarterback at play when we're clearly
I didn't see that much of a difference.
How did you not see that much of a difference? See, Teddy Bridgewater that we saw today could not put up that game against Baltimore.
The same as Tua.
There is no upside. There is no upside with Teddy Bridgewater.
They look the same. The quarterback play was consistent throughout the game.
But that's what you're doing though. You're cherry picking Tua's quarter and a half against 2.5 quarters that Teddy Bridgewater played. You're ignoring everything else that we've seen. They are not the same quarterback because in a small sample size, you think that Teddy Bridgewater looked good because his box score doesn't look so bad, shows how much of a moron that you are. Because look at how bad that Dolphins offense looked for the rest of that game. They did not do a damn thing. They could not move the ball.
Yeah, I don't think they really did in the first half either.
They were looking fine, though. They were getting down there. They were getting looks. And you're also comparing a quarter and a half that also ended with Tua getting injured.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
But look at what you're doing. This is what cherry picking is. This is what cherry picking.
I'm looking at the game we just watched. That's what I'm talking about.
Exactly. You were looking at one game compared to a much larger sample size. And in a game that ended with Tua, a game for Tua that ended with him getting carted off the field, you were looking at one interception that he had, and you're completely disregarding the rest of his body of work. And you're comparing it to his backup quarterback who cannot beat him out. Okay, this is what it takes for him to get into the game. This is how bad they don't want to bring Teddy Bridgewater in. They actually made Tua come back. They made Tua come back this past Sunday, and then they made him play Thursday because they don't want to put the game in Teddy Bridgewater's hands. That should say a lot too, the urgency to get him back. And if you have watched any of these games, and if you've watched Tua in this Mike McDaniel offense, you would know that they are not the same quarterback, and cherry picking a quarter and a half that ended with him getting injured and comparing it to Teddy Bridgewater, who did not look good. Again, just because his stats look good do not mean that he played well. That Dolphins offense did not play well with him in. So just because you're looking at the box score like you do, okay, you'll probably read a blog that says, oh yeah, Teddy Bridgewater has upside, and all of a sudden you're going to trade a couple picks for him because some fucking moron wrote about it. Then okay, go right ahead. But if you want to dance on Tua's grave because it's what you like to do, because this is what you wished for, and you want to try and rub it in that he threw an interception in a game that he got knocked out of, okay, plenty of quarterbacks throw interceptions. Teddy Bridgewater threw an interception. Okay, it happens. Okay, but you're just cherry picking one moment. You're using it to rub dirt on his name while he's trying to get released from the hospital, and you're not even making any sense. Your points are horrible. There is no way that you can watch what Teddy Bridgewater did out on that field and say, oh yeah, he looked just as good as Tua. Maybe if you want to say that Tua didn't play well tonight, that is fine, but you're talking about one game. There is no way you looked at that and said, oh yeah, Teddy Bridgewater could be the starting quarterback for the Miami Dolphins, and they will play just as well as they have been and as they would with Tua Tagovailoa being their quarterback. There's no way you genuinely think that. That's a horrendous take. And if that's how you believe, if that's what you believe, I don't want to do a show with you anymore, because that's at the point of where you're just trolling.
It's not what I said. That is at the point. It's not what I believe.
That's at the point where you're then what do you believe? Because what are you trying to say about Teddy Bridgewater? And what is the comparison that you're trying to make?
Teddy Bridgewater's quarterback play was very comparable to Tua's first quarter and a half when he played.
Okay,
in this game.
Who gives a fuck? Who gives a fuck? Tom Brady played like shit last week. Should I now start ranking all these guys that are fucking numbskulls beneath him? Should I start ranking them above him because they might have had a better week than Tom Brady?
No.
So what's your point then? Who gives a fuck?
That the quarterback play looked comparable
in this quarter and a half on a Thursday night where Tua probably was not fit enough to even be playing, and then he actually got knocked out. You want to point out how he threw one interception, and that makes him lesser than or equal to Teddy Bridgewater. Who gives a fuck? Who gives a fuck?
All right.
Eli Manning outplayed Tom Brady. Okay, is Eli Manning better than Tom Brady?
That's Tua talk.
No, is Eli Manning better than Tom Brady because he beat him in a Super Bowl?
I'm not sure where you got to that take.
Because in that game, because I'm talking about a game that I watched where this quarterback was better than this quarterback or comparable to. So now I think that he must be better than.
I just think the offense looks really like the offense.
The offense did not look good. Did you watch this game, you fat idiot? Did you watch this game? How many points did they score in the second half?
3 points.
And how many minutes were left when Tua was in, right? He played what, a quarter and a half. So you're talking about, one drive where they came out and they scored. And then when they settled in, right? And he was the actual quarterback. He wasn't just coming in on the fly and just trying to get something done, right? They scored 3 points. We are talking about a Miami Dolphins offense that we've talked about is incredibly dynamic, has two of the best receivers in the league, puts up tons of points. They come out and they put up 3 points in the second half. And you're trying to tell me that the offense looked good? Are you kidding me?
I didn't say the offense looked good.
You just said that.
I said it was comparable.
You just said
the
that
quarterback play throughout the game was comparable in this game.
You just said that the offense looked good with them. You just said that
the offense looked good. I think the offense is good, regardless of the quarterback.
It's clearly not.
The offense is good.
It's clearly not. It's clearly not. They put up 3 points in the second half. How can you say that the offense is good with him at quarterback?
The first half.
What?
It looked comparable to the.
Okay, this is one game. We're talking about a short week, a Thursday night. How many Thursday night games look like fucking shit? How can you say that this Miami Dolphins offense is comparable with Tua and Teddy Bridgewater in a quarterback?
In this game, that's what I said.
Who gives a fuck? Who gives a fuck?
All right, then let's move on from it. Let's move on from it.
Okay. So no. So we should judge everything based off of one game now. We should judge everything based off of one game.
We shouldn't.
So then who gives a fuck? What is your fucking point? I talked about
Tua's game against Baltimore.
What is your fucking point? Who gives a fuck? That is literally like the dumbest shit I've ever heard. Oh, because in these 2.5 quarters, he looked comparable to him. What? Okay, who gives a shit? What narrative is that?
I think it plays into the same narrative.
That is what you bring to the table.
My take on Tua.
No, you had a whole game. No. You had a whole game to watch and come up with takes, and that is the best that you could come up with. That Tua threw an interception, so we should focus on that. And that because Teddy Bridgewater came in and his box score, his completion percentage looks all right. That the Dolphins offense is just as good. When in the second half with Teddy Bridgewater as their quarterback, they put up 3 points. We are talking about the Miami Dolphins offense. Is it a real take that I'm hearing from you?
The take was the quarterback play was comparable from Tua in the first half, quarter and a half, to Teddy Bridgewater the rest of the game.
Okay, so what does that tell me? So should I drop Tua and pick up and try and get Teddy Bridgewater?
You're jumping to extremes. You're jumping to extremes. Not what I said.
So then what is the take there? What is the take there? Who
that take plays in the same narrative that I've been saying from the beginning, that Tua is not the guy.
But how? But the quarterback. Okay, but we have just seen. But we're talking about Tua's season. We're talking about Tua, who was the QB5 coming into this week. What was Teddy Bridgewater? What was his rank?
I mean, you argue for Tua when he has a good game. So, like, what's wrong with me arguing against him?
Because he got hurt. Because he had his fucking neck snapped.
I'm talking about
he couldn't play a whole game.
The play before he got hurt.
Because he had his fucking neck snapped in half, and he couldn't play a whole game. And instead of focusing on the 3 games that he has played well, you are focusing on the 1 game that he was carted off the field because he threw an interception before that. There's nothing to take away from this game because he was carted off the field.
Okay. Okay.
When Tom Brady tore his ACL, Randy Moss fumbled on that play. So that means that on Tom Brady's first play of the season or first drive of the season, it resulted in a fumble, and that was it. Does that mean that the Patriots offense could not move the ball, was turnover prone with Tom Brady at quarterback?
A real stretch of an analogy.
No. Tell me that. Does that mean that?
No, I'm not playing your analogy.
Okay, so how can we take away a quarter and a half when we have an actual sample size? How can we take a quarter and a half that ended with him getting carted off the field into any consideration?
It's a good rebuttal.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it's great.
Because your argument is fucking stupid. All right, I think it's fair. Into this week 3 matchups.
All right, week 3 matchups it is. That was Tua talk.
All right, so week 3, I'll just run down. I'm not going to do the scores. I'm just going to do the results. We had Big Brain beat the Slow Stroke Kings. We had the Most Athletic Sons beat Go Tigers. Lamar and the Shits beat I Love My Mom. JT and the Zits beat Slippery Pete. Team Occasional Viber beat Waukesha. And Carson Wentz beat Team 2 Pins. Pete, are there any specific ones that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I think McMurrow v 2 Pins. Jalo versus Mike.
You think that McMorrow beat 2 Pins?
No. Like, I think there's 3 matchups that I think stuck out to me the most, which is McMorrow versus.
No, I'm glad that you think McMorrow beat 2 Pins.
Yeah, well,
I can confirm he won by 10 points.
All right, well, let's start with that one. McMorrow versus 2 Pins.
All right. I mean, it's a big win for McMorrow. I think in general, in terms of his direction, it's probably not the best for him. I think this is a team that I've been always saying should just be starting that rebuild, maybe getting a head start, but he wants to keep competing. I think this is the type of thing. It's like, when you get to the end of a round of 18 and you hit your best shot of the day, right? It's that shot that keeps coming you back. This keeps bringing you back. This is kind of McMorrow's win that brings him back, makes him think he has a chance. I'm not liking it. I mean, you got Dalvin Cook dealing with a shoulder injury. He is practicing, but it's never a good start, right? There's always the opportunity for something to kind of, get re-injured. I mean, we just saw it with Tua, right? I mean, like I said, I don't know if that was something that was directly caused because he rushed back, but it's still a bad look. It's kind of the same thing with Dalvin Cook, right? He's got the shoulder injury. He's a running back. He's taken a lot of hits. It's kind of why I'm all right with the Lions taking it slow with Swift, because I'd rather just kind of take it on the chin for a week or 2 and then have him come back healthy and hopefully just finish out the season. With Cook, who knows if it's going to be a nagging thing. I feel like with Carson Wentz, I think maybe he might be turning into a pumpkin, just a redheaded pumpkin. He had 8.64 points last week. He did have the hot start. I think we're still going to see those big games from Wentz, right? You can definitely put him up, especially when he's got to be running around and slinging and everything. But I think we're going to see a lot more of these single digit games. I just feel like it's, another thing where, McMorrow had a good week, 128.4, but it was also a very down week for Team 2 Pins. 128 is still good enough to win a lot of weeks, but I don't think it's very indicative of, where McMorrow stands. Maybe it does establish himself as the favorite to get that 6th spot that we've been talking about. But, overall, I don't think it moves me too much in thinking that McMorrow is more of a contender than he was, heading into last week. What do you think about this matchup?
Yeah, I think people had immediately jumped to the conclusion that we were wrong last week. Last week we were talking about McMorrow selling these running backs because they're aging and not putting up the same numbers. And then right in our faces, they turned around and put up 60 combined total, like Henry, Cook, Zeke, and Pollard, 60 total of the 128. And like that's what McMorrow probably sees and thinks like, okay, I can make a run this year. Like these backs are still in their prime, but I just don't think they are. I don't think they are. I think you're right. These are the kind of weeks that make McMorrow think he can be a contender. And mask like his urgency to sell these guys before his team ends up, with just decaying assets on it. So Pollard and Zeke closed it out Monday Night Football. His running back stepped up. And the difference actually in the game seemed to be the tight end. I remember George telling us in the one episode he did with us that like his team, Two Pins, hasn't really got that Kittle season yet. Like they've always had George Kittle, but they haven't really got that Kittle top, tight end top 5 season yet because he was hurt. And he had a slow start to his debut, and that seemed like it. I mean, you can pick any position, but it seemed like that was the biggest differential that cost Two Pins the matchup.
Yeah, I mean, so I think the big thing with McMorrow's running backs too is that you look at them, and I think that this could be something that contributes to maybe McMorrow holding on and being a year late as opposed to a year early. But it's like when you look at Derrick Henry's game log, it just hasn't been impressive so far. I mean, we're talking about 3 games, so it could easily be something where just shaking off some rust. Obviously, last game was a huge jump in points. He was getting 8.2, 8.5, then he got 22.8, but he was still only getting 4.25 yards per carry. And, that's still very good, but I just feel like you look at Derrick Henry and you kind of hope for more. I mean, he's had seasons up around 5. Last year he was 4.28, and that was a year that he came back and, he had the foot injury, he came back, and it felt like we were maybe starting to see some aging. But watching that game last week, I didn't feel like I was watching old Derrick Henry. I felt like he was getting some of the big runs when they needed it. But I think that also the volume that he got, those 20 carries, and then what also carried him was getting 5 receptions for 58 yards. I think that the Titans, they kind of felt like their backs were against the wall. Treylon Burks, it's so funny because he's been so efficient in limited usage. And then last week he had his highest snap percentage, but he had his lowest usage. And it's because watching it just felt like the Titans were really leaning on their veterans, and they just felt backs against the wall. We just have to get this win grinded out. Go to Robert Woods, go to Westbrook-Ikhine, go to Derrick Henry, just kind of get these older guys, get these vets the ball, people that we know we can trust, and just kind of hold on to the ball and kind of get to the chains and do everything right. And they got that win out. I feel like now they kind of got the monkey off their back. They might start kind of opening things back up like we were seeing in the first 2 weeks where they were throwing to these rookies, where they're throwing to Burks. Phillips wasn't playing last week, but, I mean, we've seen his usage go down. But I feel like now that they kind of have that win, get that monkey off their backs, they can kind of go back to these rookies, start working them back in. So I don't know if I don't know. I don't know if I'm seeing another huge season from Derrick Henry. I think you can still have a floor that keeps him around that top 10, but I don't know if we're going to see that top 5 upside from him anymore. And then, with Dalvin, it's like, he's like good, but I just feel like he's looked better in real life than he has for fantasy. I'm looking at his game log right now, and he's had these good games. He's only had 1 touchdown. He's gotten kind of involved in the passing game, but he's putting up 12.3, 5.6, 13.6. And then you look at guys like Zeke and Pollard. I just feel like they're going to eat into each other's production and kind of limit that upside. And, we're seeing them. It's another thing where they're a better real life duo than they are a fantasy duo. And I think we talked about this last week with, Jones and Dillon, where,
Yep.
You can still get a good floor from them and you can still get, 10 to 15 points. But I just feel like that upside is severely limited because if one guy is going to go off, that almost certainly means that the other guy's not. So it's going to be kind of tough for McMorrow. I think that's an Asian team, but with 2 Pins, yeah, I mean, I think this league, I feel like it's, it's still top heavy. It's still that top 5. And then you can kind of narrow it down, especially having both Pins, 2 Pins and then the Vipers up top. I think those are still the better teams, but maybe it's not as dominant as we thought going into the season. And then that's kind of how I feel. I mean, I think Herbert might really be hurting. And, I kind of like the Texans this week too. They're +5 hosting the Chargers because I feel like the Chargers might be in a little bit of a slump, right? They're getting hurt a little bit. I think Staley might be actually limiting Herbert's upside. I don't think he's that good of a coach. I think he's going to be the guy that, in a year or two, they end up firing him and trying to get that upgrade to kind of elevate them. Cause I feel like he kind of maxes them out at being like that 9-10 win team. And I feel like with Herbert's rib injury, I mean, he just didn't look good last week. He did lead them to that game winning or backdoor cover against Kansas City, on that Thursday night game. But despite doing that, he didn't look that great on that drive either. I mean, he had that one throw that really stuck out where he stepped up and he had a guy like wide open right at the sticks. And he just like threw like a duck, like 5 yards. And I feel like, Herbert came back. He completed, I think it was like 50% of his passes last week. They looked really bad against the Jags. They're not running the ball at all. I sent that thing to our group chat. I think it's like 18 running backs have more rushing yards than the Chargers do as a team. So it's like, I just feel like that offense is so limited right now. And despite having the weapons, Keenan Allen, he did practice this week, but I think he left practice early today. I feel like we could see a little bit of a slump from Herbert here. He's clearly capable of proving me wrong. But, I mean, I still think that overall this two pins team is strong. They're, just because of these receivers, right? I mean, Cooper Kupp and Jamar Chase and Stephon Diggs, and then what we saw out of Devontae Smith last week. I don't know how often we're going to see that with the Eagles, though. It could be more of like a round robin thing. Like it's like, all right, whose turn is it this week? And that might make it a little bit of a pain in the ass for that flex spot with two pins. So, again, two pins are not the deepest team, but they're so top heavy. Their starting lineup so good. But I think there are a couple chinks in the armor just with the Herbert injury, maybe Devontae Smith not being as reliable to consistently put up these huge numbers, and then Kittle, and then those running backs. There are some question marks there, but there were these question marks last year, and they figured it out. So maybe it is just a recipe that can't be messed with. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, their wide receivers are the calling card for the two pins. Like, I still have utmost confidence in them. Top three in the league for sure. Definitely a championship threat. With Herbert, it's tough. Like ribs is one of those injuries that you don't know how much is affecting him. Like he throws a pick and like grimaces. You're like, okay, that was on the pick. Like it's like, when do you start saying, okay, he's healthy and like it's not affecting him at all, or like you just don't know how much it's affecting him. I guess when he's throwing, so it's hard to judge like Herbert's upside, especially against the Jacks. He didn't practice all week. Like,
Yeah, and it's one of those things too where it almost
it's
doesn't
hard to
matter what
judge.
side you're on because I mean, one, you have to deal with taking the hits. So there's that. But then also it's like, I mean, I just feel like with the throwing motion, it's like obviously, I mean, I think if it's inside on the throwing arm, that's the worst. But even when you're just coming through and you're opening your body up or something, it's like,
So yeah,
there's
whole
still that
four.
that tugging. So it's like it's just gonna be uncomfortable anywhere. It's not like getting an injury on like your left hand where it's like you can just tape it up and deal with it. But I
For
mean,
um for McMurrow's running back, this is a question I had because you mentioned a couple of times the term sample size, right?
yeah.
Like you hear analysts say now, like, oh, short sample size, you could turn it around. Or my point is, or my question, I guess, is what point does a sample size become significant? Like week
Yeah, I mean,
four,
I
we're
think it's more
25%
when
into
it
the season. Like
yeah, like I mean,
when does it start being significant?
I think for a guy like Zeke, right? I mean, I think that his
Right.
demise is, greatly exaggerated, right? I mean, people talk about him like he's completely fallen off, but here he was RB6 last year,
Right.
and he's never gone under 4 yards per carry. And I always feel like that's like the true sign of a washed running back when you get like this Hall of Fame guy that's suddenly putting up 3.5 yards per carry, and it's still good enough to keep him a starting job, but it's just like it's not as dominant as it used to be. And I mean, I think with Zeke, it's more the usage. I think he's more in there, with the Cowboys to kind of get those, just grinded out yards. I think it was part of my take that was talking about it, where, if Pollard were a workhorse back, would he look this good, or does he look so good because Zeke's in there just kind of getting those 3 yard carries? All right, 3rd and 3, we got to get the first here. Let's just hand it to Zeke, have him put his head down, maybe punch it in the end zone, that type of thing. And then when Pollard's in, that's when they kind of open it up because it's 3rd down. There's the threat of the run and the pass. And, he's just getting those looks where, I mean, maybe if Zeke was getting those looks, he'd look so much better. But, I think like that Cowboys offense, we've just seen it now that they are a backfield that's going to split it. And I think that what we've seen is something that we can kind of rely on, right? Where, Derrick Henry and Dalvin Cook, and, I'd say more so Derrick Henry, just because he's the one that's had more of the concerns with, aging and kind of getting washed up. I think that the threat's always there, right? I mean, and I think that's the thing with all these guys is, even a guy like Julio Jones, I was talking about this with, I think, Talon last week, but, you know, everybody's so quick when he had those, big catches, Julio, right? When he had those big catches in week 1, everyone was so quick to be like, Julio's back. He's not washed. The Titans were fucking up with him, all that stuff. But then all of a sudden, Julio's right back on the IR where we're used to seeing him. And then you realize, okay, he only had a few, like those couple catches that we're thinking of are all that he did in the game. So he had some huge splash plays. And that's what you see out of these aging stars, right? Even think about Michael Jordan on the Wizards. He couldn't put up, 30 points a game like he could on the Bulls, but he could still go off on any given night. And that's a guy like Derrick Henry. So he might mix in more of these bad games, but he can also still put up, 15 carries for 150 yards and 2 touchdowns, probably, when he needs to. So I think right now the sample size isn't there for Henry, but I think it's more of a trend to watch. Um, because it's also tough, right? I mean, he came off the injury last year, definitely rushed back to try and get back for the playoffs. So right now, I think we truly are dealing with a 3-game sample size, and his most recent game was 22.8 points. The efficiency kind of seemed down, 20 for 85 and a touchdown. You feel like in a game like that last year, 2 years ago, Henry's probably getting 140 yards, 2 touchdowns, getting 5 receptions too. Like that's crazy. So I feel like he got a boost from those receptions. That's not something to rely on. So when you look at like the raw rushing stats, it's like, all right, he got 14 and a half points on the ground, and 6 of those are from a touchdown. So yeah, I'd say it's more a trend to watch. And, it's kind of something that we've always had an eye on with McMorrow because of how his team is built, because it was so built around these running backs. And it's just a position that's so known for the shorter career, shelf life. And, they're all around that age where you kind of look at the aging. So, yeah, I mean, McMorrow's team, again, it's a ticking time bomb. I think that's the best way to put it. It's going to be good until it's not. At some point the lights are going to go off and he's not going to be able to put them back on. What do you think, though?
Our take stays the same. I mean, take stays the same from last week. It just shows like this week, like you said in the beginning, this week is the kind of week that tells McMorrow he thinks he can, or gives him an idea that he can still compete with these guys. When,
Yeah,
like you said,
and that's the thing. I mean, and he still is competitive. I mean, he can still put up these numbers. It's just I feel like when you're talking about kind of the range of possibilities and week 14, 15, I'd be more willing to bet that Team Two Pins can put up 140 than McMorrow. And that's just,
right.
McMorrow's team can still do it. I just think better teams, the teams that we have ranked ahead of him, are just more likely to do it. And that's kind of where it falls.
And they're in his division. He's got Vibers and 2 Pins in his division. So it's tough.
Yeah, and that's what's always going to hurt him, especially in the power rankings. It's like, it's hard to make any type of move in that division. So, when we're already fighting for what we believe to be one spot, and I mean, maybe not, just looking at some of these injuries, and we can kind of use that as a segue into the next one. I mean, I don't think there's much of a matchup to talk about. I think maybe we could just kind of get into talking about this team, but JT and the Zits, they did beat you by 17. I think it is notable because it's your team and he only won by 17. He put up 77.1 points. Of course, the big news, coming off of the Trey Lance injury was starting Jimmy Garoppolo. We're looking at Bowen's team and it's like, it just feels like morale is really down. Stafford just hasn't been, doing anything crazy yet. Garoppolo is just frustrating to watch. As somebody that doesn't own him in fantasy, so I can't imagine being somebody that starts him. I'd be wanting to throw him through a wall, seeing some of the stuff he does in the pocket. But, Bowen's team, again, it's just, he has the good players, but his depth just kind of seems to be getting chipped away at. He does have Renfrow on the bench. He traded for Odell. He got Michael Gallup coming back. So he could get a spark of life, in the next few weeks. And, his floor still allows him to kind of stay. And, maybe this puts him in the mix for that 6th spot, but I don't think that Bowen's team is in danger of falling out of the playoffs right now. But it's definitely morale. Definitely a tank to the morale, a team that was so focused on battling with Simcoe, taking these types of hits. It's not a good look for Bowen. What do you think about Bowen's direction moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, Bowen's the most interesting team in the league right now because he's the last undefeated team at 3-0. But he's got 307 points for, which is 7th in the league. So it's a very fugazi 3-0, and it's because he's playing the Gabagool division, me, Mikey, and Jalo, who don't put up numbers. The Gabagool division is in shambles with Bowen on top of it. So yeah, I mean, I think Bowen still makes the playoffs because of how bad this Gabagool division is. And we can kind of get into Mikey's team a little later too, but the QB woes have been bad. I looked it up. Stafford had 5 more touchdowns and 4 less interceptions at this time last year. And that kind of gets back to the point what I was saying about sample size. Like, at what point do we say, okay, the Rams are a good team. They're going to figure it out. Stafford was top 5 quarterback, like a 6th quarterback last year. He's going to figure it out. But at what point do we start saying, like, no, this is just Matt Stafford this year. The sample size is something we can take as credible.
Yeah. And again, I think it's just one of those where you almost take it in stride where, we heard all about Stafford's elbow in the preseason and you just start to see it. And, I haven't watched Rams games too closely, just really when they're coming on, red zone. I feel like, I'm not seeing the Rams on red zone too much, actually, now that I mention it, but, so I can't really speak to like if Stafford looks different when he's playing or not, but obviously the stats are not looking good. He's not putting up good numbers, fantasy wise. And we know about this, and he didn't look good in that preseason opener when we got to watch every play that he had. So it could be just something where you say, well, maybe that elbow is a problem. And, maybe that's going to be something that lingers. I mean, I definitely think that this Rams offense is weaker than it was last year. They don't have Robert Woods. They don't have Odell. And, they didn't have both at the same time, but, Allen Robinson's not filling that role right now. He's not doing that. And, he got his touchdown week 2, but, I just haven't been impressed with what I've seen from him. And, I mean, I remember I tuned into the game last week, and it's like, he just missed he just whiffed on a ball. It was a slant, like right at the goal line. He just completely whiffed, and that was one of those things where it's like, I just know that Allen Robinson on the Bears or on the Jags wasn't just dropping that ball. So that's one of those where you just start to see it's like, I was already thinking that Robinson was slowing down, and then you see him start whiffing on plays like that. It's like, oh Jesus Christ.
Right.
And I feel like the Rams are definitely weaker than they were last year, more so on offense than the defense. But it could be a little bit of a lingering problem. I still think Stafford can, be like that mid-tier quarterback. But last year he was putting up, I mean, what was he last year in terms of ranking?
I think he was QB6.
Yeah, he was a QB5. So,
QB5.
I don't think that that's there right now. And, just, I feel like Bowen's upside took a huge hit. I feel like the floor, I feel like what we're seeing now is kind of Bowen regressing to his floor. And you're just trying to find those spots where, where's the upside, right? And that's kind of something that, he was talking about it last week, and I kind of had the same thing where I think he had one touchdown last week, and I had one passing touchdown, one rushing touchdown, and then one receiving touchdown. It's one of those where you kind of feel like you hit rock bottom with these scores. And, because I had 62.98 points, Bowen had 77. Even Mikey was low, but he wasn't that low. But it's like you hit those points where they don't score the touchdowns, and all of a sudden you're like, where the hell am I ever going to get these points from again?
Right.
It's like, I saw my team put up 62.98 points. The week before I put up double that, but all of a sudden I'm like, am I just going to be stuck in like that 60 points forever? It's like, am I ever going to score touchdowns again? Like,
Yeah.
Max not throwing these touchdowns. I mean, right now I might be because of my injuries, and we'll get to that in a second. But yeah, I mean, I think Bowen's going to bounce back. I don't think we should overreact too much. I mean, he's still got Olave getting a million targets down there.
Yep.
Tyreek Hill looks great. It does feel like there's maybe a back and forth with Tyreek and Jalen Waddle. Of course, they both went off week 2, but I feel like it's more there's just going to be games where Tyreek's just getting peppered with targets, and then I feel like there's going to be games where Jalen Waddle's just getting chunk play after chunk play. And I mean, we've already seen Tyreek kind of have that low game, that 4.3, but besides that, he's been absolutely killing it. And I think that Bowen could still have a strong bounce back week, and having any type of doubt might feel silly in a week or two, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on. I think he's not I'd say he's undoubtedly, just given the injuries, not as strong as he was looking going in, but I still think that there's plenty of opportunity there. He's still got really good players in his roster, but injuries are never good.
He's got.
I think I could see him just being a team that makes a move for a quarterback. I think a guy like going after a guy like Brady, which we've been talking about,
Right.
Could be in the cards for him. I think that makes him a big player for that. But at the same time, maybe Bowen just feels like riding it out. I just feel like it's tough for him because he doesn't have a first rounder at all. He definitely doesn't have his own. So there's no incentive for him to not try and ride it out. So I could see something tells me that Bowen's not going to be finishing or entering the playoffs, with Jimmy G as the starting quarterback.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely candidates to grab a quarterback. I also think, something we talked about last week was him starting AJD and Aaron Jones for weeks 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah.
And we talked about cannibalism. They put up 9 points combined last week. So we kind of hit that nail on the head. I'm looking at Bowen's roster now. He took AJ Dillon out, put Chris Olave in. I think that has to do with the AJD injury, which actually could have been a blessing for him. Like if one of them goes down, he can kind of focus on one of them being the starting lineup. Now with Olave doing well, he's going to have some of these coaching decisions to make, I think, every week. Like he's going to have to play the game to start or sit Aaron Jones or AJ Dillon every week. Because I don't think you can leave Olave on the bench anymore. So interesting going forward with him, but I still think he's a lock to win the division to make playoffs.
Yeah. And, speaking of the division, we can move on to Mikey's game. Hold on. I'm trying to, I don't know what I hit, but, so Mikey, they lost to the Most Athletic Suns, 99.62 to 87.86. So that means that Mikey now is 1-2. He has now put up 107.72 in week 1, followed by 89.22 and 87.86. So I feel like this is what we were talking about with Mikey when he started getting those injuries, when Elijah Mitchell went down, when Najee Harris was dealing with a foot thing. Mikey's team just wasn't looking that powerful, and right now they're not. I mean, I got the roster pulled up right now. He's starting Noah Brown this week. I know that Noah Brown's looked good. He's had a good connection with Cooper Rush. They were playing, they were getting reps together on the second team. So I feel like that's just a natural kind of connection. But, besides that week 2, I guess, explosion, if you want to call it, he got 17.6. That's definitely a career high for him, I think. Yeah, I'm not even going to bother looking through. I'm just going to lock that in and say that's his career high. But, you know, I mean, I feel like we're looking at, he's gotten 5 receptions every game, 68, 91, 54 yards. He had that touchdown week 2. You know, this is a 5 to 10 point guy. You know, Gerald Everett, 3.5 points last week. T. Higgins is great. Fantastic. Justin Jefferson has, you know, looked oddly off. I don't know if teams are just playing, you know, all over him like that or what. But, you know,
Too high safeties a lot.
yeah, I think that it must just be, you know, making them throw to Thielen or whatever. But, you know, I mean, if that's going to be a problem all year, that could be an issue. And then, you know, you're just starting Melvin Gordon. It's tough. I mean, you know, things can definitely turn around. I think Russell Wilson can definitely figure it out. I mean, you know, I'm not really big on Russell Wilson. I've kind of thought that he's been washed for the last couple of years. I think he's overrated to begin with. You know, he's definitely been a good fantasy quarterback, more so in the first half of seasons. And we're now in the first half of the season. And he's looking horrible. You know, I think that part of that could do with just, you know, new head coach, a new star quarterback. You didn't want to play at all in the preseason. So there could be a rust factor here. You know, I actually like the Broncos +3 against Vegas this week. You know, because of that, I feel like, you know, maybe we might start to see the Broncos shake that rust off, maybe kind of figure it out a little bit. And, you know, I mean, you know, speaking on that game, I think they're just a more talented roster right now, than what the Raiders are dealing with. And McDaniels, I read a thread about him, and I think he's very bad at managing people. I think that the Raiders might just be in shambles right now. I don't know if there's any turning it around for the Raiders, but, you know, Russell Wilson can definitely figure it out. Joe Burrow, you know, was starting to look a little bit like his old self. That O-line definitely still has some issues. He was under a ton of pressure. I mean, we saw that they get no running game generated at all. I think, you know, Mixon had like 25 carries, and I don't even think he got 100 yards. And they kept getting stuffed at like the goal line. So there's like no push on that O-line. So that's still definitely something to work, like, you know, look at. And I just think there's a lot of questions around Mikey's roster. You know, Justin Fields has looked like just a miserable pick. You know, he picked them over Pitts, ETN, you know, so many good guys. You know, I wouldn't even throw ETN in there. He hasn't been that great, but I shouldn't even throw Pitts in there. He's been horrible.
Yeah,
But you know, Fields has looked very disappointing. You know, and it just makes you wonder what Mikey's doing with his quarterback position, right? I mean, we already saw Mikey at the time when he picked Fields, he had Burrow, he had Lawrence. We play in a league where you can only start 2 quarterbacks, and he drafted a quarterback to sit on his bench. I guess that could kind of signal that Mikey was always looking to make a move and maybe trade one of those guys. But when he traded Lawrence, he traded him to get another quarterback. He traded him to get Russell Wilson. That has not panned out at all. I mean, we could just look at it. So Mikey traded Saquon Barkley, Trevor Lawrence, Tyler Boyd, Ronald Jones for Russell Wilson, Melvin Gordon, Tim Patrick. Right off the bat, right? I mean, right from the beginning, I thought that was a bad trade for Mikey. You know, I've been saying for a while now, I think that if you watch the last year's quarterback class, just fantasy aside, like just real life, I think Lawrence and Mac Jones are the definite hits. You know, Mac Jones obviously doesn't put up huge fantasy numbers. Lawrence did not put up great numbers last year, but I think if you watch them play, you can tell if there's something about the way they carry themselves. You know, that they belong in the league, they belong as starters. We've seen that Mac can win. And then we've seen, you know, I think that if you just watch what Lawrence does, especially with the limited weapons that he has, and even what he's doing now, I mean, I know that they paid a lot of money, you know, to these receivers down in Jacksonville, but that's still not that talented of a roster. Christian Kirk is definitely a lot better than people thought when he signed that contract. But, you know, Zay Jones is like 27, 28. He's never gotten anything going in the league. He's looking good with Lawrence, you know. You know, James Robinson is back. They suddenly seem like they have an offense going. And, you know, I think that we're starting to see Trevor Lawrence actually break out and kind of come into his own. And, you know, I just think from Dynasty, from a 1v1 perspective, I think I'd rather just have Lawrence straight up than Russell Wilson. So when you're mixing in a running back like Melvin Gordon, who I think is much better in real life, but, you know, he can still put up good numbers, but he's still splitting that backfield, and it's still not his backfield, right? That's obviously Javante's backfield that someday, you know, that's what they're building towards. So you're getting a 1B running back and then Tim Patrick, right? You went after that Bronco stack and you gave up a quarterback who, like I said, I think is already better than Russ from a dynasty perspective. And then right now, from just a fantasy perspective, right now, he's the better fantasy quarterback. And then you also gave up Saquon Barkley, who's having like a renaissance coming off of his injuries. You know, I think it's just questionable moves from Mikey. I think, you know, he's kind of like put himself in some type of weird quarterback purgatory. But I mean, what do you think? You always seem to have something to say about Mikey. What do you think about that trade? What do you think of kind of the state of the union with his team?
That trade could go down as one of the worst top 5 worst top trades in this league. I mean, we said it as soon as it happened. The general public of the league was that was bad trade. Mikey stood by his guns. And then it got even worse because the Broncos were a dumpster fire and Saquon blew up. Mikey's 1-2 with 294 points scored in the league, ninth, and 330 max points for in the league, 11th in the league. 330 max points for. He owns his own 23rd first pick. Right now, he's got the 1.2, which is kind of crazy. I think he's got the 1.2.
Yeah.
I asked Mikey a little bit what does he think of his team at the moment for like just a statement for State of the Union. And he doesn't really have any moves planned. He seems like he's still content, or it seems like he's gonna still try to make the playoffs. Doesn't plan on selling or trying to tank that pick or whatever. He just said his team's young and he's gonna let it play out. So he's still riding with it, but I don't see how you don't look at this roster or look at Mikey's team and say, okay, he was he went to the championship last year. Sure, he lost, but he went to the championship last year. And then now he's 11th in the league. Like it's that trade. That trade doomed him. It was a horrible trade. And that's why he's where he's at. That's why he's where he's at.
Yeah, because I mean, I think if you want to move on from Lawrence, that just feels like a natural progression into, moving to Fields. But I mean, that wouldn't have panned out well anyways. But you still could have used Lawrence to get other things besides Russell Wilson. It just didn't make sense for his team. He was somebody that seems so focused on getting young, especially trading a guy like Barkley, right? If you want to trade, if you want to get Russ, then you'd want a guy like Barkley because you want these older guys on your team. But if you're trying to get rid of a 25, 26-year-old running back, and Barkley's not that old either. And
No,
I know that he's had the injuries, but realistically, he doesn't have that much tread on his tires either because he's missed a ton of time. So it's like, we could still see another few years of Saquon being this workhorse. And, we already said Lawrence, we think is better, from a dynasty perspective. But, who's to say just from what he can provide you at the running back position, who's to say Barkley isn't better than Russ right now from a dynasty perspective? I mean, if he can give you a couple more years, and there is still the injury threat, and that always feels looming with Saquon. But I mean, if he can put up RB top 5 numbers, right, for the next couple of years, which we know that he can do, and it all comes down to him staying healthy. I mean, that right there, it's a horrible, horrible trade.
Yeah. I mean, you talk about the quarterbacks a lot, and I think like, it's tough to like. I'm going to say I was talking about sample size. I don't think we know enough about Russ and the Broncos yet. Like they could figure it out in like a long-term perspective, but it was the running backs that really killed them. Like Saquon really killed them. We saw it with the Elijah Mitchell injury. Lost Elijah Mitchell, traded away Saquon, which leaves them with Henderson, who I talked to Mikey. He was hoping Henderson would pan out as the Rams starting running back after those first week or two. But it looks like Akers took over. Akers had 12 last week.
Yeah.
Henderson had 4. So he's done at running back. Now he's starting Melvin Gordon going forward. And Najee's had his injury issues this year too. So that trade really left Mikey thin. Like that, I don't know how you don't look back and say, okay, that's the reason why I'm in 11th and I'm coming from the championship game.
Yeah, and like Najee's not doing great either. I mean, his big thing last year was volume anyways. And now he's only getting 10, 15 carries. He's getting a little involved in the passing game. Against New England, he had 6 targets. He had, 5 targets in the 2 other games combined. So it's not that much usage. So it's like, from what we've already seen with Najee, we know that it's like, if he's not getting that volume, then he's not really bringing that value either. So, having Najee back just hasn't been that much of a bonus for him. And, I mean, it just feels like this is a team that's kind of bottoming out a little bit. And, the bright side with Mikey is he does have his pick. So it's kind of just his call whenever. And, right now he has a little bit of a head start.
He doesn't have like old assets that he could trade right now and try to get that pick to be a better spot. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. Cause I mean, it's
like his oldest players like of good levels, like Godwin at like 26. So it's like,
yeah. And it's like, I mean,
what's he have any moves to make? You just got to let his team play out.
Yeah. Because it's like, maybe you could move a guy. Yeah. I mean, exactly. Like, who's even old? Like,
right. Like,
is Hollywood Brown too old for his team right now? Is that just where he wants to be? Or, you'd think, ideally a guy like Russell Wilson would be a guy that he'd look to move, but at this point he's invested so much in him that he's gonna
kind of have
stand
to
by him. And with Fields not really looking that great, that's your second quarterback anyways. And I do think that it's more likely than not that Russ is gonna, figure it out. Just from watching the games, it looks more like his accuracy is off than anything. And that could just be a timing issue, could just be a rust issue as well, could just be both. It doesn't look like he has any less zip on the ball. I don't think it's not like he can't throw the ball anymore. So I think that his problems are fixable.
Right.
You know, I still I still don't view Russ as like that top option anymore. But he can definitely still, pick it up and give Mikey more of a floor. And, I mean, if he's just putting up, 15 to 20 points, and that's fine. And that gives Mikey plenty, and that makes quarterbacks not really an issue for him. It's more about just what he invests in Russ. Yeah, again, I'm not too worried about Russ's long-term production. I think it's more just where Russ is at in his career and how much Mikey invested. That just makes it so bad. I think right now he'd rather have Trevor Lawrence, in this dynasty league, but I'm
Do
sure
you
Mikey
think
will have something
do you
to
think
say.
Mikey's still in that conversation for that sixth playoff spot?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, guys like Jefferson and Higgins just give him such a good floor. And, if Wilson does bounce back and, Hollywood, he's looking more comfortable in Arizona, he definitely still has that floor. I don't think that the field to get into that sixth spot is really that strong.
It's like
Uh,
McMorrow and Jalot, pretty
yeah,
much.
like I think it's competitive. I think that, I think that plenty, but most of the teams can pop off and, maybe get lucky and go on a run, but it's not really like a talented bunch. And there's a reason that, this is the group that we're talking about. That's kind of the outside looking in, competing for one spot.
Right.
In contrast to the top five that are clearly the five best teams. But um, yeah, I mean, that's kind of, I feel like that kind of covers everything with Mikey. I mean, I think that trade always just needs to be talked about.
Hmm.
Um, I guess the last matchup we can cover. Hold on, where were we? Not week before now. I guess we can cover both because we can kind of say kill two birds with one stone, which is things that we want to say about both. We can talk about Big Brain and the Slow Stroke Kings. So Big Brain, disappointing week by their standards, 105.86 points. They still got the win. They are 2-1. Big Brain, it's been a modest season for them. They two good wins. Well, last week wasn't too impressive, but 117.44 points, 121.74, and then 105.86 last week. So this is not the same high scoring Big Brain that we're used to seeing. And maybe that's something that'll play into their favor, maybe kind of taking a different approach and, maybe going through the wild card is kind of what they need. Weirdly, even though it doesn't have much to do with anything, but, maybe this new approach is what they need. I mean, we're looking at a team that I feel like their upside we're kind of seeing be limited, in front of our eyes. I mean, Rodgers has not looked that great, and he's getting the job done, to win football games right now. But I'm not really seeing it with that offense. I think that he needs, Devontae there just to put up these huge points. I think it's still put up, these 16-point games that he's put up in these last 2 weeks. But I mean, Dobbs has been great, or at least he was great in that action last week. I mean,
Yeah, he
you can
was.
kind of take it with a grain of salt, just considering the injuries last week. And, he had more of an opportunity, but he played well in that opportunity, right? That's what you
Yeah.
want to see.
Yeah.
But, we're still talking about an offense where Sammy Watkins is a top receiver, and, Alan Lazard. And, I don't think Alan Lazard's that impressive. I think he's played well, in spurts, but, this is a guy that we're talking about. He's been in the league for how many years? He has had plenty of opportunity to break out in that Packers offense, and he hasn't. And, I just think this is an offense that's going to be very limited. And I don't really see a pathway for Rodgers to put up these huge points that we've seen in the past few seasons. I mean, he's capable of it. He's like this magic man, but, I just don't know. I think maybe he's more capable of carrying this team to a good season record wise than he is putting up crazy numbers and having another insane fantasy season. But, the big thing I want to talk about with Big Brain was Christian McCaffrey, right? Right now he's RB11. He's putting up, looks like he's averaging about 14 points a game. And for the most part, that's something that you wouldn't want to complain about. And I was talking to, all the Big Brain owners this past weekend. I was out with, my best friends in the world. We hit downtown to Bedford, night I'm never going to forget. And I just asked him this question about McCaffrey because sure, he's RB11. This is one of your 4 RB1s that you have on your team, but are you really happy with that, right? Because, okay, maybe this is the play for McCaffrey to play all season, but when you have McCaffrey on your team, and maybe it's different because this isn't redraft, so ADP isn't really attached to it, and it's not
Right.
about where you drafted him, even though I think McCaffrey's playing well for his ADP, in redraft leagues this year, since he's going later in the first. but when you have McCaffrey, that's a guy that you have him on your team to put up 20 to 25 points. So when you're getting half that, it's like, how can you really say that you're happy with it, right? And I feel like we're kind of seeing the effects of the two players I've already brought up with Big Brain, with Rodgers and with McCaffrey not putting up these huge numbers. They're putting up, just like I said, modest numbers. They're putting up 117, 121, 105. And, Mixon, I mean, he just put up 15.4 points on 24 carries, and 6 of those came from a touchdown. And, yes, he still got the touchdown. He also had 4 receptions, but he got 24 carries for 61 yards. It's 2.54 yards per carry. Mixon right now hasn't had over 3.04 yards per carry in a game. That's through 4 games so far. And, I don't think he's going against the most staunch defenses. I mean, Pittsburgh is obviously a good defense. They had TJ Watt in that game, so you can kind of cut them some slack there. But Dallas, the Jets, and then just looking at, Miami, they're green on this. So that means that they've been somewhat favorable matchups for running backs. And, Mixon's not doing anything impressive. And, Chubb's doing pretty well. I mean, he had that huge game that he exploded for, but he's leading the league in rushing. But, this team just seems a lot more limited than it has in years past. I mean, who knows what Devontae Adams' upside is with Derek Carr instead of Aaron Rodgers. Amari Cooper just feels like he could be going up and down. I mean, he has had 2 huge games with Brissett, but I mean, it's just another thing. It's like, how much have we seen from Brissett? How much, can he kind of keep that stable until Deshaun comes back? Or is this going to be more of a, every other game type thing, or, dependent on the matchups? It's just, even looking at Eckler, I mean, he hasn't had any touchdowns. The Chargers, they're having no luck with the run game either. So it's like, this running back stable that they've had that is kind of like their bread and butter and their powerhouse just hasn't been that impressive this year. And, I think Big Brain, maybe it is the change that they need, but it's also something to keep an eye on. They're just kind of coming back down to earth. I think the league's catching up to them right now. And, maybe they're not the dominant team anymore. Maybe they are just more of a competitor than they are a contender. What do you think about Big Brain though?
Yeah, I think it's a good take, but I think it's because of they're so heavily invested in running backs. So I'm not sure if it's like just this year in the NFL or if we've been trending. I feel like we've been trending this way, but wide receivers are outscoring running backs with ease, right? Like that's a very trend this year that wide receivers, I don't have a stat to back it up, but I know it's true that wide receivers have been outscoring running backs by a ton. And we look at a team like Brooklyn that's so invested in running backs. And then, we're in a super flex league. So obviously quarterbacks are a major thing. This year, NFL, it seems like quarterbacks and wide receivers are going to win this league. And we're looking at a Big Brain team that's so heavily invested in running backs. Now, granted, they have 4 of the top 5 running backs in the league, or top whatever in the league. So they are a playoff team. Like, they're doing well. They're putting up, above 115, 117 every week. But I just think a team, like you said, it has a low ceiling because they're so heavily invested in running backs. So like you see teams like top 3 been talking about, 3 pins, 2 pins, and Simcoe have elite quarterbacks and elite wide receiver cores. And like decent running backs, but elite at quarterback and wide receivers. Those are the top 3 teams in this league. This year it seems like a quarterback and wide receiver league, and we're looking at a Big Brain team that is so heavily invested in running backs, and it's just getting average quarterback play. So I think that's kind of why they're in that competitor conversation, not like a front runner.
Yeah, and I mean, even they went from having Kelsey to having Ertz, and Ertz is tight end 3 right now. But how much does that really mean? I mean, he's putting up 10.4, 11.5, and 7.5. So, tight end's kind of just like a wasteland right now. It's like, if you don't have Kelsey, if you don't have Andrews, it's kind of been a top 4, top 5 in years past. Right now, it's a top 2. If you're not in that top 2, it truly does not matter. I mean, I would definitely rather have Ertz than, say, Gesicki.
Yeah.
Just based off of that. But at the same time, it's like
one game.
Yeah, but then at the same time, it's like, why would you, why spend on tight end right now if you're not getting a top option? So it's like, you kind of just got to bite the bullet and, hope that something else falls in your lap. But yeah, I mean, Big Brain, it's just looking, I mean, and, I'll say it again, but maybe it is just the new approach, and maybe that's what they need. And, maybe if they're just consistently putting up that 120, I mean, right now it just feels like they're more in the territory of where we're seeing my teams in the past, right? When my teams are just putting up 120, but it's doing it every week, but I didn't have like that 130, 140, 150 point upside. So if a team went off against me, I wasn't going to beat them. But I feel like that's kind of where they're dropping right now. If they're not getting that kind of cornerstone play from, like you said, the quarterbacks and the receivers, then maybe they're just not going to have it this year. And, maybe these teams are going to kind of pass them by, the teams that are loaded at quarterback and then, getting insane play out of receivers like, like 2 pins. And, yeah, I don't know. But, on the other side of that matchup's my team. And, we could have
Injury
done
bug.
this yesterday and it would have applied, and now it applies even more with Tua. I mean, who knows what's going to happen with Tua? But Mac Jones is not out, but he's doubtful. I think ultimately he's not going to end up playing this week. I think it's ridiculous that they're talking about him playing this week when they were originally talking about
6 to 8
what,
weeks.
yeah, 6 to 8 weeks, whether or not he's going to get surgery. David Montgomery went down. Let me check. I don't know. Was he practicing this week? He sat out. I do have Herbert, so that doesn't worry me as much. But DeAndre Swift dealing with an injury. My team right now is a little bit snake bitten. Pete, what's the league saying about my team right now?
I mean, you're decrepit with injuries. I don't even know. Like snake bitten feels like I used it as like a trend. Like you're continuously snake bitten. You just got a monsoon of injuries put on your lap in 1 week. So like it's tough to really say anything like definitively about your team. I mean, list the names just like down the line. Tua was hurt, obviously Tua.
Yeah,
Miles
so
Miles
Tua,
Sanders
Montgomery,
go
Swift.
ahead.
So my two starting running backs.
Yep.
Mac Jones is out. So
Two of your
going
three
into next
quarterbacks.
week, I only have Davis Mills at quarterback.
Obviously, Brian Robinson's not back yet. Yeah, I mean, you just got killed by injuries, and obviously, you still have a young wide receiver core. So,
Yeah,
I mean,
part of it was like, I was kind of just waiting for Swift to be ruled out because, like, I don't want him to play if he's going to be just getting, a couple reps, right? And because one of that, like, for one, that sucks for fantasy because I'm like obligated to start him and he's limited. And then, but also just from like another standpoint, it's like, if he's not going to be putting up those big numbers, then, why not let, my other guys get some run? I mean, the offensive coordinator for the Titans, he's talking about how they do want to get Traylon Burks more involved. And I touched on it earlier. I mean, he was incredibly efficient, by a lot of different metrics in terms of what he was doing with his touches. He's like I think his spot in the league is going to be a really good yak guy, just kind of getting those slants and then turning upfield and turning a, 5-10 yard slant into, a 50-yard touchdown or something. But what's that?
Like a Michael Thomas almost.
Yeah, exactly. Just some type of shit like that. Kind of get the ball in his hands early, let him do something with it, especially with his size and speed. But getting guys in there, I think guys like Elijah Moore too. I mean, he's getting a ton of targets, and I'm hoping that Zach Wilson coming back, they have a little bit more of a rapport. Flacco was throwing it a lot. He was looking okay at times, but ultimately Flacco stinks. And I don't think Zach Wilson's necessarily that good, but I also think the way that he throws it, the way that he plays can be more effective in the NFL right now. And I think it's better for fantasy as well. And, I also think the way that he plays with how he scrambles, I think that plays more into, I think it'll help both Elijah Moore and Garrett Wilson. I think these are both guys that kind of just find a spot, get there. Zach Wilson can run around and kind of make some magic with his legs and then just kind of dump it right off to them. And then these are two guys that can do it. So I think both Jets receivers are going to kind of, maybe not see a boost. I think, at least not see a boost in targets because they're both seeing a ton of targets, but I think maybe they'll be, more reliable targets now instead of, Elijah Moore having 4 receptions on 9 targets, 3 on 5, 5 on 7. I mean, those aren't too bad, but, last game you like to see more with 9 targets. I think that's more about the QB play than it is about him. I don't think he was dropping 5 balls, but, I mean, it's going to be tough sledding ahead for my team, especially if Tua is going to be missing significant time. I feel like at this point, it's safe to say he's going to be at least out for next week. I just feel like the Dolphins, even if he's good to go, the Dolphins marching him out, in 10 days, maybe not the best look for them. Maybe let him, get some rest and relaxation. But it's going to be tough for my team. I feel like, the ceiling's very limited, but I'm excited to see what my guys can do. See if Davis Mills can put together a good game. Curtis Samuel's looking good, looking like an absolute steal. And then Drake London. What's that?
The silver lining is Khalil Herbert.
Yeah, I mean, Khalil Herbert, whenever David Montgomery's not playing, he has like superpowers. So, right. He goes out there, he puts up a ton of points. That's why I'm not worried. I mean, of course, it would be nice in this position if I had my own pick, but at the same time, I like what I see from my guys. So it's like, I'd be more concerned if my team outright stunk and had no potential. If I was doing this with my team of old guys, if this was my team with Evans and Thielen and whoever else I had, then I'd be concerned, but I have young guys. I like how they look. If I do end up, falling down the standings and with max points 4, and, my pick ends up being, much better, that does stink. But at the same time, I like who I got. So, I'm not too concerned it's just going to suck. It's really going to suck for a while, marching out these lineups. I mean, it already gets to the point now where halfway through the 1 o'clock games, I'm like, you know what? I'm not even going to check the scoreboard.
Yeah. I mean, that's
I'm
I
going
don't
to
even.
watch. I'm going to focus on my bets, and
Yeah.
I'll check in. I'll see if somebody, if all of a sudden somebody breaks off a big play and I'm back in it, then word. But yeah, my hopes aren't too high up.
Yeah.
I'm hoping I can just
Would have to
pencil
go
in a win
correct.
against you, and maybe steal a couple more. But I mean, once my guys come back, I think I'll be fine again. It's just, any team goes down with this many injuries, it's not going to be good. And, I was already kind of starting from a position with less leverage than these better teams. So that makes it look much worse. I mean, I don't know. I feel like that kind of covers it for all the matchups I was interested in. I feel like it wasn't too much, too much more to talk about there. Was there anything else you wanted to touch on?
No, I think that was it. I mean, the last thing is just the Jets wide receiver situation is interesting. I think we're going to talk about it a lot because you've got Moore and I've got Wilson. Something to keep in mind, something to keep it close to. We're definitely going to talk about it often.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm not too concerned about it. I think that we've seen plenty of times in this league. Two receivers can coexist, and it's not the same as the running back stuff that we've talked about. I mean, we've seen Godwin and Evans, even Godwin, Evans, Antonio Brown, and Gronk all in one offense. We've seen Higgins and Chase, and we've just seen so many, Allen and Williams. It's like, all across the league, Lockett and DK. It's like, we see this everywhere. So, I think Zach Wilson, it comes down to a talent situation thing, right? Elijah Moore is good. Garrett Wilson's good. Even if Zach Wilson comes out and he absolutely stinks it up, at some point they're just going to have a good quarterback in that place. And, quarterback play can only be so bad and can only hold receivers back so much. And if these guys are as good as we think they are, I think that they're going to be fine. I mean, we already saw it. They're both getting 10 targets a game. So it just comes down to them getting the throws where they need to be and making sure they can do something with them. And I think there's both guys that are talented enough to do it. So, maybe Garrett Wilson, I mean, he does have the draft capital behind him and all that, I think you can, make the argument, and maybe it's too early to tell who's truly the better pro. But Garrett Wilson has the draft capital. He has the profile. So even if he's the 1A, you could still be a very good 1B. And
Right.
That's what I like about Elijah Moore.
The last thing I do think is worth mentioning is Simcoe, back-to-back weeks at 140 plus points.
Yeah, I mean, what more is there to say about Simcoe? I mean, we're both very big on his team.
Yep.
Every passing week, every passing quarter, it feels more and more inevitable that he's just going to win this league. I don't know. I mean, what more can you say? What are you going to say?
The only thing I was going to say, introduce storyline here. We are friends who gamble. That is our league. Side bet on the side of our league right now, for those who don't know, Zach Bowen versus Ryan Simcoe. It's just points for scored during the regular season, right? It was $100.
I believe so. Yeah,
points for regular season, most points for scored.
Yeah.
I asked Ryan how he felt about the matchup, quote unquote. He said Zach Bowen, or I asked just Ryan in general how he felt about his team. He said, quote unquote, Zach Bowen better have his wallet ready and open. I asked Zach how he felt about that statement. Zach said, Simcoe deserves good things. He is very ugly and needs a W now and again. I actually think he's a lock to win this league, no doubt about it.
Yeah, I mean, that just feels like the consensus opinion league wide. I think everybody's rooting for Simcoe. It just feels like there's no way it can't happen. Anything short of a championship should be viewed as a failure at this point. So
yeah, I agree. Completely.
So hopefully he can take that on and he can really pull through for all of us.
I agree. There it is.
All right. I think we call it there. Another good episode. We'll be back with the power rankings next week. I think moving forward, we will start to integrate more guests on the show, both in the league and out of the league. I guess we'll leave it at that, right? So power rankings, I guess nobody on the table right now. I guess for the first guest that we'll have on, we'll see how things play out and kind of play it by ear from there. But this is the Lex Pins and Pete show, and we'll be back with the power rankings next week.